One of the most interesting things about back collecting is how much my perspective can differ from what it likely would have been if I had gotten something when it was first released. Apparently, time doesn't just heal wounds, it also grants different perspectives. Who knew? Yes, there is absolutely no denying that Energon, Grimlock, and Swoop here are deeply compromised toys. In some places, the molded detail practically has a soft focus quality. It looks kind of fuzzy. Even the spots where it's more easy to make out, it still lacks the kind of sharpness you'd usually find on Transformers, both back then when these were released and now. Swoop's obvious legs that make up the backpack, this isn't a dig, that's just how Swoop usually operates, can't actually plug into their intended locations unless you angle them out to the sides, and even then, you can kind of see they don't really plug in all the way. It both looks awkward and is frustrating to see because there's no reason for this to be the case. They just had to put the peg holes here in different spots and everything would have been fine. And Grimlock looks like, well, this. I know it's been said so many times, we're all sick of hearing it at this point, but this is not a good look for Grimlock's Dino Mode. The head is almost as thick and round as the rest of the body, the tail is too stumpy, but also looks too wide. The legs have these enormous voids that make up 2/3 of the hip assembly. It's not great. Thing is, while I used to own this set back in the day, I haven't had it for years, and now that I have it again, I'm having a difficult time hating any of it. There's an abundance of imperfections and baffling design choices, for sure, but speaking as someone who's been bored with the G1 rehashing since Siege, so 2018, 2019, I really appreciate what this does accomplish. For starters, I like how both dino modes clearly go together but also look very distinct. Not because one is a T-Rex and the other is a Pteranodon, not a pterodactyl, thank you very much, but because of the colors. They both use the same dark grays and yellows, while Grimlock's light gray arms and claws match Swoop's light gray everything else. The darker grays on Grimlock do set him apart a bit, but what I really like is how they also gave him red accents while using blue for Swoop. It's simple, but it's also pretty clever and effective. I also appreciate how they lean so hard into the robot dinosaur look. Sure, you could argue that this is what the Dinobots have traditionally been since G1, but I'd counter-argue that the G1 look wasn't so much robot dinosaurs as dinosaur transformers. Here they look way more robotic, with loads of admittedly fuzzy-looking wiring and pipe details molded all over Grimlock's back and tail, what looks like exhaust pipes and pistons on Swoop's backpack and wings, and so on. These look more like what you'd find if you peeled the rubber skin off of an animatronic dinosaur, and now that enough time has passed and enough toys have come out that I'm sick of G1, I consider that a positive, really. You even get a little bit more articulation out of both of them than what we've seen in a lot of recent official animal modes. Said a lot, not all. Obviously, the Kingdom Megatron mold can dance circles around Grimlock, but we've definitely had more than a few bricks along the way, too. Like Rhinox and Rat Trap. But yeah, Grimlock can look up and down, rotate his head a tiny bit, open his mouth an equally tiny bit, flail his arms, and do pretty much everything you'd want from the legs minus an ankle tilt. Got the rotation, outward motion, forward and backward at the knee, even have thigh swivel and below the knee swivel, and you can move the claws around. Minus the head restrictions and in particular the mouth disappointments, he's actually relatively poseable. Swoop is a similar story with decently articulated wings. They just flail around on a ball joint and rotate at the edge here. Plenty of leg movement, kind of. You get the rotation, you get some in and out, you get some rotation, you get the claws, and it's not really necessary, but it's there. You get a bit of useless up and down neck movements, but again, it's there. And opening mouth that can open way too much. They're also a decent size when you compare them to modern figures. Both of them are roughly Voyager-ish, maybe a big deluxe in Swoop's case, at least when you look at the bulk. Which, yes, doesn't necessarily mean much when figures have been steadily shrinking over the years, but in general, they're still a good size, and for whatever it's worth, the plastic feels really solid. I briefly considered doing that pencil thing as a joke, but one, I feel like we're all over that nonsense at this point, and two, even for a joke, it's not worth spending any time on fools like that. So these two sentences are all anyone's going to get from me here. Now, before we move on to those robot modes, I've got a Ko-fi, I've got a Patreon, links to both at the end of the video as well as down in the description if you want to support the channel. Otherwise, typical YouTube stuff like comment, share, subscribe is much appreciated. Now, we are going to start with Grimlock because he is Grimlock and he just has to go first. Those are the rules. And transformation on this guy, pretty basic. I just close the mouth, push the head down, and there is actually, it's hard to tell, but there's a slider. Angle this back a bit. There's a slider here where it slides down. Whoops. Let's pop the head off. It slides down for the T-Rex mode, so you can get more like angles out of the head. I guess I just didn't slide it down as far as I thought I did, but you want to slide that up for the for everything else. So slide that up, bring the arms up. I'm going to unplug the this thing, which plugs in on one side just fine, doesn't seem to hold on the other side, but whatever, it's an old toy. And this will just flip back for now. The arms, you actually want to slide the hips, which are now the shoulders, up. There's a little slider, doesn't settle into position on either side, or in either, either end of the slider, but you just want to slide it up. Rotate forearms, what becomes the forearms, fold little back claws back and little front claws forward. And then there are these sliders here that slide forward, and that gives Grimlock his fists, arms, whatever. And then for the rest of it, unplug the tail from the back, brings down a bit, split the legs, fold the tail bits around to the outside, straighten the legs out, and this is much more traditional Grimlock leg design. But there are also heels hiding in here, so there's little yellow bits. You just want to get those out, and those will act as heels for the robot mode, and they do help a lot with stability. And then finally, split this back section open, and you just kind of tuck the dino head into the back here. And I'm not entirely sure what the intended angle is. I feel like coming at it like this is kind of as close as you can get it, but it's very awkward trying to figure out how this all is supposed to line up. So yeah, I just accordion it in as best I can. And there is Grimlock, and you can see he is standing. Those heels make a big difference. So there's Grimlock. And then Swoop, don't get ahead of yourself, is very similar in some ways to the classic Swoop Transformation. Just straighten out the legs, they just unpin from back there, kind of. Flip down the feet to fold up these little flappy things, and also these little flappy things and go back just to get them out of the way. And slide these out, and these things are way too tight on one of them. I forget which one when I got this guy. I ended up loosening these screws just a tiny bit, and I also applied a little bit of shock oil to loosen the slider because it was just scary to do. So what I do is I kind of push the little blue thing there to slide it out, pull a little bit, and then I grab this piece this piece below the swivel here, so that when I pull, I'm not pulling on the mushroom peg that is connecting the arms together. And then this assembly swings up, and it doesn't really tab it. Like, it looks like it's supposed to tab in. There are these little there's these little slots or whatever here, and these little tabs or whatever here, but it doesn't come in far enough for it to actually tab in, so I don't really know what's supposed to happen there. And this doesn't really compress any further down, so I can't quite get that to like lock in, but whatever. Anyway, same deal here. Just gonna shift that up, and this just kind of sits like that. And I'm going to push the little blue piece to get the slider going and slide that out, and then the claws just kind of fold in to become hands, like claw hands. And then to finish this guy up, this just comes down and the wings just kind of tuck in. You can arrange them however you want. And then the head comes down, and there are these little tabs on either side here that go on these little notches on the side of the neck. And that clips that together. And there is Swoop. And you can also kind of play with this if you want. I do kind of like a slight upward angle on it, but you got options. The engineering on both of these dorks is simple, but they do each pull off an interesting step or two. Swoop's dino legs swinging up to become the arms is kind of neat, and I like how they didn't attempt to give him hands. He's just got these nasty, in a good way, looking claws. I also do appreciate how Grimlock's back opens up so you can partially tuck the dino head and arms in there. It doesn't work perfectly, but hey, it's something different. What I do definitely like is how the dino toes fold around to give him Wolverine-style claws. More Grimlocks should let you do stuff like this, honestly. I know some do, but more of them should. Now, I'll admit, this is where my something different defense is going to get a lot of use, because these robot modes are definitely a, let's go with departure. Grimlock is surprisingly small, even stout-looking, with arms that go down well past his knees and the daintiest waist I've seen on a Transformers toy, and that includes all of those eye-rolling failures Hasbro and Takara has rolled out for several of the Lady Transformers characters. It's not even the slimness that really bothers me, though it is pretty ridiculous. It's just the way that there's no tapering whatsoever between the chest and the waist. The torso goes from this barrel chest to what's basically a stick flanked by two equally narrow sticks, aka the thighs. His body type is engine piston. Now, getting back to those arms, I really wish they sat higher in robot mode. The shoulders do slide up, as you saw during part of the transformation, but they don't click in, which sucks, and the actual outward moving bits are still resting at about waist height. Like they're down here. Normally, I'd also criticize the forearms being super messy because the sliders for the fists and the screw holes are facing forward for all to see, but clearly that's not the case here, because I actually modified this Grimlock before filming. I unscrewed and swapped both forearms so that the sliders and holes would be on the backs in robot mode. This does mean that they face out during Dino mode, as you probably noticed, but I super do not care. This way, it just looks much cleaner, and the fists are kind of the same no matter what side you put them on. Like, there's not really a clearly defined thumb. If anything, when you put them on this way, the fist almost makes more sense because of where the seam is. It kind of makes it look like this is the thumb rather than going this other way. I don't know, I just think that looks better. It really would have been nice if these joints could have maybe slid up into the unnecessary voids in the shoulder domes. Then the arms would sit higher and the voids would be gone. They don't. They're pinned in, so that's where they are. This is just such a strange stylistic choice that makes no sense to me. And I tried seeing, like, maybe if you fold it around like this, and, like, it looks better in terms of where the shoulder placement is, but it clearly doesn't work as far as, like, you know, being usable for the toy because of how this thing gets in the way. Like, I don't know, maybe that was the original intention and something happened with the design process or the budget or something that made it so that they couldn't do that. But it's not what the toy does, and it would have been much better if it did. And of course, there's the head. I won't deny that this is a bad look for Grimlock. It's weirdly squished and puffy looking, and it comes off more like something you'd see on an Action Master, or, yes, a Play School toy. I know, we've all seen those criticisms. I suppose it sort of fits with the rest of the figure's aesthetic, but it's still... yikes. Swoop clearly handles things more successfully because, I mean, look at him. Dude looks regal AF. He's like a suave vampire without the threat of neck nibbles. Or maybe he's into that, which I still wouldn't hold against him. His proportions are also way less awkward than Grimlock's, even with the stick thighs and tiny biceps. He has these cool-looking wings that fold up along his back and still manage to look really cool, as I said. Claws instead of hands, I do legitimately really like that detail. And of course, these shoulders. You know I love big shoulders. Swoop's rocking the 80s power suit style to a T. Of course, he does still have his share of downsides. The head sits a little bit below the shoulder line, which looks a little awkward, and the cool Pteranodon head in the chest definitely falls apart when you look at him from the side. That sticks way far out. Swoop's head is also better than Grimlock's, even if he's stuck with the expressionless character creator face. Which does make me wonder, why does Grimlock look so puffy when Swoop manages to both fit the aesthetic and still look good, if a little bored? Also, I don't think they painted his eyes. That's a weird choice. Articulation for both figures is decent for the time, I think. Certainly not up to modern standards, but these things are not modern figures. Still, they do manage most of the key movements: head swivels, requisite shoulder, bicep, and elbow articulation, and knees. No waists, but that's easily explained away because of the necessary engineering, and the hips are just ball joints. So the legs do move forward, backward, and out. Not much, but they do. But there's no thigh swivel, which is a bummer. All things considered, though, articulation is pretty solid for what these are. Height-wise, they're about what you're probably expecting. One roughly deluxe and a pseudo-Voyager, except in robot mode the roles reverse, with Swoop as the tall boy and Grimlock as the little guy. Though, to be fair, a good third of Grimlock's Dino mode is just sort of curled up into a ball and sitting on his back. But now it's time for the main event. This time we are going to start off with Swoop. So, first off, just going to bring the wings up and back on all of those hinges and ball joints and whatnot just to get them out of the way. Going to bring the dino head up, rotate the arms down, split Swoop's entire midsection and hinge everything out. That stuff just kind of goes down. And now what you want to do is you bring the head down and you bring the dino head down, and what'll happen is Swoop's little head crest thing will kind of sit inside this hole on the underside of the dino mode jaw. So you bring this down, and then it'll click back into place, and that kind of locks Swoop's head in position, so you don't have to worry about it flopping around or anything in what will be the combined mode, which is not really a big secret. And now for the legs, or arms, dino legs, whatever, what I do is I just rotate them around and then compress them back up into the dino mode configuration, just leave them sitting like that. I don't remember if the official way to do it is to have them rotated out to the side, but I prefer to have them like this because it just cleans up the profile a little bit. Then you fold down larger feet over the smaller feet, and then one thing that I don't know that I actually, it's been a long time since I've had this set, so I don't know how much of this transformation I knew to do when I was younger, but this step that I didn't realize was there or forgot was there, you actually compress the legs a little bit. Just slide those up, slide those knees in a little bit, and here we've got Swoop's this, and put him off to the side, and now it is Grimlock's turn. We're just going to bring the dino stuff back up here, and this will compress down over the head. This will close back up. These arms will shift back down, and you want to rotate them so that they're facing out. The legs will come back together. Just fold the heels up first if you fold them out, peg the legs back together, swing everything back up and peg it into back section, bring the tail sections together, and then take the entire body from the chest down and split it apart and bring it all forward like so. And then this piece was Grimlock's chest, swings down all the way. And now comes the actual combining part, which There's a specific way to do it, but if you do it, this guy's actually really solid. So what you want to do is you clip this piece over these little circular joints around Swoop's dino head. So that clips together, and now you can see this is still kind of floppy and messy. What you want to do from here is this big gray thing goes through, it feeds through this spot, this little gap in the lower part of Swoop's back. The wings kind of angle down, and they'll kind of support these pieces, kind of sit in there. But what you also want to do is take the wing tips, fold them up, and these will actually go over part of the back section here and kind of help to tab everything together. So this, let me zoom in a little bit better. So this just kind of comes in and tabs over the back. So really, there we go. It tabs over the back to really lock all of this stuff together. And there you can kind of see how the wings are supporting the back. The little grippies up there are tabbed in. So that actually really solidifies the combine mode. Like you can see that it's not, like if I hold it from down here, the upper body is not flopping around at all. So that's what you got to do. You got to use these little grooves on the tips of the wings. It makes a huge difference. And lastly, just want to fold this flap all the way back and then fold the combine mode head down. And there we go. There we have Mega Dinobot. So there is one thing I prefer to do with this guy. Also, this, you could probably tell, like, this is the main reason why I wanted to swap the forearms, because I hated having the ugly sliders front and center for the combine mode. But what I actually prefer to do for the combine mode is do the swoop thing. So I just push the fists in and rotate the back claws of Grimlock's feet down to give him claws, because he's Mega Dinobot. You know, this makes his hands look a little bit bigger. I just think it looks nicer. Another thing you can do is you can fold Grimlock's forearms down to kind of thicken the look of the midsection a little bit, but I prefer to just keep them up there. I just think that looks fine. And I've seen, like, people can move these bits up, like use the swoop joints for these arms to swing them back so that they're a little bit less obvious, or use them for like extra support up there. But if you tab those wings in like you're supposed to, or at least like I think you're supposed to, then you're really not going to need these for support. And honestly, I've kind of gotten used to the way these look hanging down there, so it doesn't really bother me. So I just leave them. Objectively, I know that the Mega Dinobot combination does not excuse the multitude of compromises both Grimlock and Swoop had to suffer to make it happen. But truth be told, I don't care. I love this ridiculous thing. There's so much wrong with this combined mode. The waist is super tiny, the arms are stuck in a slightly forward position that can only go more forward or awkwardly rotate out and up. Like, that's just silly. The head doesn't rotate at all. You can modify it, but it doesn't actually rotate out of the box. I haven't modified it yet. I've been considering doing it, though. The legs don't move much, and no matter how you arrange them, they look like a bisected Swoop with an unfortunately placed Pteranodon head sitting in the middle. And Swoop's arms are just sort of hanging off to the sides like saddlebags. And yet, when you acknowledge the bad and squash down the "it's not what it's supposed to look like" bias, and take this in as a whole, doesn't it actually look kind of cool? For one thing, the proportions are actually kind of good. Ignore the entire half of a T-Rex butt hanging off the back. Just look at the actual humanoid shape here. This is actually decent. The legs and arms, the actual legs and actual arms, not the added baggage, do look all right, and the torso and waist come together in a way that visually makes a kind of sense. It's a little narrow, but that's about it. Connecting everything correctly also helps for sure. I've seen so many videos that talk about how this mode doesn't hold together, and that's just not true if you hook it up right. In particular, those slots on the tops of Swoop's wings, which I talked a lot about during the transformation, they really help to solidify everything and keep the T-Rex butt halves that are the shoulders attached and into place. Like I said, you can also swing Swoop's arms up and back, clean up the leg silhouette a little bit more, and add extra support, but I prefer not to because that further limits what little posability you get in the legs. And like I said, I've also kind of come to appreciate the saddlebags. I don't know. I guess we'll just, for now, rotate these back and up so you can see, like, that's kind of what it looks like. But then from here, it looks a little bit weird, but it is what it is. Yeah, the T-Rex butt halves forming outward shoulder spikes is silly, but when you also have the tops of Swoop's wings right behind them, doesn't it kind of circle back around and make them look almost cool? I said almost. But really, I do like how it looks. It gives the visual illusion of Mega Dinobot having these big Final Fantasy boss monster style quad wings or something. I wish I could say similarly nice things about the combined mode head, but even though it manages to look better than Grimlock's, it's still got that huff to it that just doesn't work. I do appreciate the attempt to borrow some elements of Grimlock's head design and add teeth around the edges, almost like he's wearing some kind of stylish intimidation muzzle. And I dig the idea of making it look like he's wearing some kind of spiky medieval helmet, but it still doesn't end up working all that well. I do love how it looks like it could have been a Proto-Volcanicus, though. And heck, if this is what was needed for us to get Volcanicus as a recurring character or figure, I'm glad it exists. We're up to 3 of them now as of writing and recording. Power of the Primes, Cyberverse, and Legacy. As for articulation, it technically exists, but is pretty limited. I did go around tightening a lot of the joints around the legs because they had trouble holding the figure up. It didn't fall apart, just didn't like to stand up, but yeah, it's pretty limited. As I mentioned before, the head doesn't turn, which sucks. Doesn't seem like it should have been a limitation out of the box, but it is. But at least you can probably mod it, and I probably will after I do this video at some point. It can, if you really want, look up and down, though, which doesn't really look great because it disconnects it from the body. The shoulders can't spin 360, but they can rotate out and up, though they also clash into these bits here, so like that's about as far out as they go. You also get the same exact bicep and elbow motions and forearm swivels as Grimlock because these are the same arms, and like I said, I like to push the robot hands back in to give him the combiner mode claws, so you can use the claws for like finger movements. And you can also bring the arms forward on that flicky joint. I can't help but think that, once again, if they gave you a way to shift these up, because if you look at where these swing, it's like it's lower down than it should be proportionally. So like if these were up, they'd be closer to like a proper shoulder line, and I think that would work better. There is no waist articulation, which I think makes perfect sense given how this thing connects. The legs are weird, though. I have to move the saddlebag down on one side so that I can actually move it freely. You do get some outward motion, but it happens a lot further down than looks natural. Forward and backward motion is even worse. You get a tiny bit up here and a little bit that could count as like a swivel. And then you get Swoop's hips that can move forward and back, but these are more like knees. So, and like you can still get a click out of the other knee, so it's weird. It doesn't, like that as a stepping forward motion does not look good. It's the illusion of legs, or I should say, the illusion of more standardly proportioned legs. And I guess you can rock the feet forward if you want. There's that. So yeah, Mega Dinobot is really more for standing around instead of posing, but you could do a little bit with it. What's kind of funny to me is that this guy looks like he should be pretty tall, right? Obviously not Combiner Wars height, but you'd probably think he'd be taller than, say, Studio Series 86 Grimlock. But nope, not really. Of course, he is taller than other combiners from over a decade ago, like Tripredicus, and all the junk in the upper body makes him look bulkier than he really is. Kind of like a frilled lizard. None of this is to say I think he's too small or anything like that. I'm actually kind of glad he's not any bigger than this, because for a combiner made up of 2 roughly deluxe or Voyager-sized robots, I'm not sure that would be possible. Also, I still have shelf limitations to think about. I just think it's interesting how he looks and feels like he'd be bigger when you're not looking at him next to anyone else. Like I said at the very beginning, there's no denying that these are deeply compromised toys. None of the modes completely nail it, and the entire point of the set is definitely not spectacular enough to make everything else easy to overlook. And yet, maybe it's just me and that I'm so done with G1 and so thirsty, not like that, for something, anything that twists the formula around a bit, that makes the failings of Mega Dinobot just not bother me that much. Maybe the benefit of almost 2 decades of further toy releases make this set more of an interesting footnote than a failed experiment that insults a couple of beloved characters. Honestly, I don't care what the reason is, I just know I like this silly thing. Sure, it's deeply imperfect, weird-looking, straight-up incorrect in several places, and awkward as a toy, but there's also a charm and even a certain level of coolness to it that I sincerely admire. Now I just need to try and mod the head like the wiki says is possible to give that combined mode some rotation. Also, no joke, I would actually be thrilled if they did some goofy, like, commander class or even leader class version of this in Legacy. They're not going to, but I would absolutely be down for a retry of Mega Dinobot. But that's enough of me making excuses for this thing. What do you all think of Energon Mega Dinobot? I can't be the only person who actually kind of likes this thing, right? Whatever your thoughts, feel free to chime in down below. I always enjoy hearing from you all. Thank you everybody for watching, and I think next time we're going to look at another combiner, but this one might be a bit of a head scratcher.